Good afternoon. We're ready to start when you are. Today, Dr. Jacques Gansler, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, will announce a very important contract for both DoD and for the Air Force. He will be followed by Whitten Peters, who's the Acting Secretary of the Air Force, who in turn will be followed by Keith Hall, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space and Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. And they have with them a team of experts whom they'll introduce to take any tough questions that they themselves can't handle. Dr. Gansler.
First question is, how did you break your leg? Volleyball. Volleyball, exactly, you got it. Be careful playing volleyball. Team sports. It's actually just an Achilles, it's not broken, but it hurts. Okay. What we want to announce today is the award of 2 Air Force development agreements and the initial launch services contract for the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle. Now, we really believe today that this announcement is the result of a success story in terms of the acquisition reforms that we are going about implementing in the Department of Defense in terms of our revolution in military affairs, our revolution in business affairs that you've heard so much about. Essentially trying to provide the right equipment, but to provide that equipment at an affordable price. It also, we think, demonstrates the potential benefits of increased commercial and military integration, something that, again, is a major part of our acquisition reform activity. It will also, by the way, increase our nation's ability to compete industrially in world markets. Now, I will be followed by Air Force Acting Secretary Whitten Peters and Keith Hall of the National Reconnaissance Office, and they're going to go into much more detail on the awards themselves and the benefits to us. But I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to highlight the innovative acquisition strategy, the commercial uses of this program, and the large cost savings that we anticipate as a result of the approach that we're taking. When we set out with the acquisition strategy, we basically had 2 goals for the EELV in terms of its modernization program. First, to enhance our space launch capability, and secondly, to make space launch much more affordable. And I say that affordable not only for the military, but also for the commercial sector. What we did was to totally restructure the acquisition process for the EELV. And as a result of that, we feel that we can project safely a $5 to $10 billion, and I say billion-dollar, savings over the life of this program. The requirement for the program, the stated requirement for the program, was to lower costs by at least 25%, and we set a goal for ourselves of 50%. And that's where the 5 to 10 billion number comes from. In November of last year, I approved 3 major changes in the original acquisition strategy for this system. First, we wanted to have continuous competition between the 2 EELV providers instead of the traditional approach, which would be to down select to a single supplier and then to be stuck with, one might say, that supplier regardless of what happened over time. We think by continuing the competition, we will then have better performance at lower cost throughout the life of this program. Secondly, the DoD will be buying launch services instead of the traditional way where you buy production and launch operations. And finally, the contractors would share in the cost of the development of this launch capability, which because it will serve both the military and the commercial world. Now, we think that the presence of this continuous competition allows us then to make a smaller investment, as I said, a cost-sharing investment, We are going to actually, as a government, put up $1 billion in terms of the development of this program, $500 million to each of the two contractors, and we expect to recover our investment by the year 2005, and beyond that, all of the savings are to our benefit. This projection is based upon the launch missions and the anticipated reduction in launch costs that we'll be realizing for the government. The contractors, both contractors on their part, will provide an investment of approximately $1 billion each. So DoD is putting up essentially 1/3 of the cost, and we expect to realize a 5 to 10 times return on investment during the duration of this program. The operability improvements of the EELV will include a standard payload interface so that we can use the same booster for multiple payloads, standard launch pads, greatly reducing the number of launch pads that will be required, and particularly off-pad launch vehicle processing. Off-pad vehicle processing, so you spend a lot less time in preparation for the launch. In fact, the launch vehicle will be on the pad for only 1 to 10 days prior to launch versus the current 28 to 100 days. We anticipate the first launch of the EELV, which, by the way, will be a commercial payload, will be in the year 2001. Then a medium lift variant will be launched in 2002, and a heavy lift variant to follow in 2003. So you can see what we're talking about here is a very short development cycle with this program, and I would argue that that's demonstrating the fourth of the acquisition reform initiatives, namely a very short development cycle time. We expect that the EELV will provide a launch system that is very competitive domestically and very competitive internationally. So the U.S. industrial base will be enhanced by the fact that not only are we lower cost, but we have two domestic contractors bidding on these launches and therefore becoming very competitive. Having two will also reduce the risks to us of being able to meet the schedules and performance and the costs that we see on this program. In fact, what we expect to get is lower cost, higher performance, access to space for both government and commercial payloads. Having the two launch vehicles provides us this continuous presence of competition and thus the prospects for not only improving our own performance but enhancing the international commercial market share. I should add that the anticipated commercial use of this EELV will amount to, as we see it, about 2/3 of the total use. That's the basis under which we are making 1/3 of the contribution, the other 2/3 coming essentially from the commercial market application of this product. So in summary, the program fills what we feel is a very important military need. Keith will probably go into that in much more detail. It also has commercial uses, which make this an innovative partnership between military and commercial, and thereby, again, further reduces the DoD costs. The EELV will provide an affordable space launch capability for our national security space missions, and it will expand our goal of commercial military integration, which we believe is vital to the success of our acquisition reform initiatives in order to get more performance at lower cost. With that introduction, let me turn it over to Secretary Peters, who's going to give you some of the details of the award. Oh, that's all right. I can pop down. Yeah. Oh, all right. If you insist.
I would have brought my crutches too, but unfortunately I lent them to General Ryan, who's had the same operation today. So,
From tennis.
Right, combat tennis. Well, I'm very pleased to join with Jack today to announce the awards for the EELV program to the Boeing Company and to Lockheed Martin. As Jack indicated, there are really two parts to this contract. The first is an EMD phase in which we're contributing $500 million to each contractor, and each is contributing roughly $1 billion in order to bring the EMD phase to a close. There then will be launch services contracts, and today we will be awarding to Boeing a launch services contract worth $1.4 billion and to Lockheed Martin worth $650 million. I think that this program is really a watershed for the way the Air Force intends to go to space in the future. It is no secret that our budgets are fiscally constrained. As General Ryan recently testified, the pace and cost of Air Force operations has increased dramatically since the Gulf War, at a time when the Air Force budgets have declined year over year, year after year in real terms. During this same period, however, advances in space technology and indeed the opportunities and requirements to use space in aerospace operations have presented themselves at an unprecedented rate. To meet this fiscal reality while continuing advances in space, the Air Force has increasingly turned to partnering, first with its government colleagues in NASA, NRO, and DARPA. Earlier this year, DARPA, NRO, and the Air Force came together in the Discoverer II program to establish what I hope and what I believe Keith Hall hopes will be a path-breaking model for the integration of national security space activities. With Discoverer II, we believe we have firmly established Zebra Space, the successful integration of black and white space efforts. Today, with the award of EELV, we are entering into a new and very exciting era, an era in which government and industry have pooled their resources in order to serve a combined military and commercial market. Today, we see the future of space, cooperation between and among all government and industry sectors. Because each of Boeing, Lockheed, and the Air Force have invested in EELV, and because the Air Force and NRO have joined together to be early launch customers, the nation, both military and civilian, both government and commercial, will enter the 21st century with 21st century expendable launch technology. Today's announcement sets into motion our Air Force's dual strategy to strengthen national security interests of the United States while also significantly enhancing the global economic competitiveness of America's space launch industry. Projections by both the government and the private sector predict a continued robust growth in commercial and international payload requirements, and indeed, the commercial world has already surpassed the Air Force and NRO in terms of number of launches per year, and we expect that to increasingly grow toward the commercial side. The EELV program is poised to provide more affordable and reliable access to space for the United States, and importantly, to provide a tough competitor in international markets. As Jack has outlined, EELV's operability improvements will significantly reduce our launch costs, while also creating a very responsive space lift infrastructure. As you can see on the chart to your right, to my left, one part of this contract is that we are going to make available resources at both Vandenberg and at Cape Canaveral to Lockheed Martin and Boeing, where they will actually prepare pads and do the launch work. There will still, of course, be government supervision for safety, but this, I think, is a major advance in the way we're going to be doing launch. There are, in fact, very significant savings to be realized from this partnership. We have a model of launches which we think are going to go from 2002 to 2020. Against this mission model, we believe EELV will reduce the total cost of launch by $6 billion off of an estimated cost using old technology of $19 billion. Thus, the EELV program will lower costs by at least 25%, and as Jack said, we are hoping that we will get as much as 50%. We have done various net present value calculations, and we believe that even after our initial investment of $1 billion, this will represent a return in value to the American taxpayer of at least $2.5 billion. During the development phase of 1998 through 2002, Boeing and Lockheed Martin will complete launch vehicle development. They will establish manufacturing capabilities, and they will construct and modify launch site infrastructure and activate launch sites at both Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida and Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. These awards, as I've said, are also for initial launch services. The Air Force will acquire commercial launch services for 28 government payloads scheduled to launch between fiscal year 2002 and fiscal year 2006. Some of these launches will also be NRO launches, which Keith will describe in more detail. Awards for launch services, as I've said, are being made to both contractors. This will provide an initial stable set of government missions to help stimulate commercial sales, and we hope create the vibrant commercial market which will drive costs even lower with this system. As Darlene Druyan, who will be here to answer questions in a minute, can tell you in more detail, the technology advances and cost savings we announced today would not have been possible without the acquisition reform efforts that DoD and the federal government as a whole have worked on over the past 5 years. Acquisition reform has reduced costs associated with contracting, but more importantly, it has opened our eyes to the quantum leaps in improvements in quality, technology, and price that can be quickly achieved by partnering with industry. That we have gotten to this point so quickly and have such an incredibly innovative program is testimony to the dedication and hard work of the National Performance Review, to members of DoD's acquisition reform community, and especially to the men and women of the Air Force who have worked so hard to implement acquisition reform throughout all of our programs. Before turning the podium over to Keith Hall, I would like to thank Darlene and her team for what is, I think, a really excellent result, one that really puts the Air Force where it needs to be for the 21st century, and one which reduces our long-term costs of going to space very dramatically. With that, Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
As you know, it isn't very often that the National Reconnaissance Office participates in programmatic announcements. But in this particular case, I was very pleased to join Jack and Whit in coming down and saying a few words about the importance of this program to the National Reconnaissance Office. We have been partnered with the Air Force for many years in terms of providing the means by which our reconnaissance capabilities get into space. And this program, the EELV program, marks a major watershed, I think, in the efficiency and effectiveness that will be afforded to our reconnaissance assets in having access to space. The benefits to us have already been stated by both Jack and Whit. It's lower costs, it's assured access in a competitive environment, and also a much more friendly launch infrastructure, less time on the pad, which means a more flexible ability to rapidly configure a launch situation to provide access to space, to configure our assets, to shape the intelligence community's response to the world environment. I would note that the NRO's ability to revolutionize the reconnaissance capabilities of the nation in the next decade, which I have talked to some of you about in other meetings, is predicated in large part on an ability for us to lower our launch costs. And the EELV program represents a major step in that direction. So I look forward to the partnership with the Air Force continuing in this regard, and also the partnership with the two great contractor teams that will be providing these services in a whole new era in space launch. With that, we'd like to turn this over to the experts, and Darlene Druyan, who Mr. Peters has introduced already, and they'll be able to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
If you want to, we can try to take a couple of questions now, or
Sure.
Turn it over to you.
If you want answers, we have to have Darlene answer them.
All right. Yes.
Yes, I have two questions. Number one, the two launch services contracts have different values, and I was wondering how that breaks down in terms of numbers of launches awarded to each company. And also, I also noticed on these charts that there are two variants of each vehicle, and all previously released designs indicated that there were three designs, medium, intermediate, and heavy, and I only see two here. So I was a little curious about that.
Okay, the chart that we just displayed over here basically shows the launches being awarded to Boeing on the top, to Lockheed on the bottom. We do it by fiscal year. You can see the first launch will be by Boeing in 2002. It's a discus. Runs all the way through 2006. Lockheed's first launch is in the year 2003 through 2005. And I guess I would like to ask a couple of my team members, General Arnold from Space Command and Colonel McKinney, the System Program Director, and Mr. Collins, the PEO, if they could wander up here with me. And I'm going to ask Colonel McKinney if you would talk about the overall designs of what we have.
Yeah. think at this point we're going to leave it to the experts unless anybody has questions for Jack or Keith or myself. We'll get out of here and get real answers. Great.
Can we get from one of you, you use this phrase zebra space. What is the advantage in basically having something can launch commercially and also launch classified projects?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is to have NRO and Air Force operations as seamless as possible. And what this means realistically is more launches on common vehicles. And that's really what we're trying to do. Now, on the other side of government interaction, what we're trying to do is build joint program offices. So we are trying to reduce the overall cost by not duplicating each other's efforts. And we've been working this for a long time, but our NASA, NRO, DARPA office that's now been established for Discoverer 2 is really the first joint program office we've had, or at least the first we've had in a while. And it is our hope that by doing this that we will eliminate duplication and will achieve a much better product for all three people. In the Discoverer 2 program, for example, NRO, DARPA, and Air Force are each putting in roughly a third of the cost. And we're going to run it with a joint team, and we're all getting very important products out of it. That's the kind of partnering and kind of effort we think we're going to do in the future.
Common interfaces, common boosters, you get the economies of scale.
I would add to that, with respect to the EELV program, we also anticipate that by the time EELV is operational, we'll have a joint program office between NRO and Air Force that's actually doing the acquisition of the vehicles as opposed to two separate offices as we've had in the past.
Keith, are the classifieds all yours, and are they all heavies?
The classifieds are all ours, and only three of those, all three of them are medium. Only one is a heavy.
Can you tell me which one it is?
That's classified.
Yeah, I would also add that the second heavy is the DSP 23 launch schedule for 2003, and that's with Boeing.
That's the second, okay.
Yeah, that's this one.
Right. Can you answer my question about the first?
That's the white world.
Thanks.
Yes.
It says initial launch services. What is the time frame for additional contracts?
The initial period that we laid out in our competition was for the year 2002 through the year 2006. I elected not to award two of the missions in the year 2006. There are some other requirements coming along, and we're going to be bundling those together and conducting a competition, I would imagine, in approximately the next 6-month period.
Where will these launch vehicles for the two different companies, where will they actually be built?
Rich?
I'll use this as a cue.
Both of them are built in various parts of the country, but the main manufacturing plants are for Boeing in Decatur, Alabama, and for Lockheed Martin in Littleton, Colorado, right outside of Denver.
Yes.
I was hoping you could explain why there's only two variants
Sure.
rather than three as originally.
Yeah, you're correct. In the past, there was a small variant, but both contractors, through their evolving design processes, decided they could save money by only having 2 variants versus 3 variants. They saved on development cost, engineering cost, and the medium design is capable of launching both the smaller payloads like GPS and DMSP, as well as the heavier medium payloads like SIBRs and so forth.
Now, did they both go with the intermediate version, which can also
Yes.
handle medium? So they
Yes.
basically dropped the low-end version,
Yes.
each one.
Correct.
Okay, this is easy today. Any other questions?
About that one.
Yes.
What is going to be the contractual relationship? What are they going to be required to provide? They've got the services. Is this a minimum service requirement? Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yes, I can. We're awarding 2 different documents today, or contract-type vehicles. The first is called an Other Transactions Agreement, and this is in the amount of $500 million to each of the 2 contractors, Lockheed and Boeing. The Other Transactions Agreement is really more like it's not a contract. We basically have laid out what our requirements are. We've laid out a series of milestones that they have to meet. As they meet those milestones, we make payments against those milestones. And coupled with that, we have what's called an initial launch service contract. And in this case, 19 launch awards are going to Boeing, 9 to Lockheed. It basically is a commercial type acquisition. It is not the typical type of contract that you would see for what we typically would have written for like a Titan IV, for example.
So they deliver the services as specified, but you
Yes.
don't, you're more oversight than,
Yeah, we are definitely oversight. Colonel McKinney would tell you I've kept a SPO very, as I term it, lean and mean. You have what, 75 people?
81.
Okay.
You were liberal enough.
Okay. I was liberal enough to give him 81 people, which includes our aerospace support. So that includes all of his CETAs, his FFRDC, as well as government employees. And this is truly a partnership. Yes, Mr. Collins?
If I could, let me expand on that just a little bit. Part of the features of the contract will be that the Air Force will lease the land to the contractors for the operations of the pad. So the contractors now will have the pads, the launch pads under their control. They will be responsible for maintaining and operating those pads. So the launch services now will become a situation where the contractor will produce and assemble the launch vehicles with the payloads on and deliver the satellites actually to orbit. The government will never take delivery of the booster as we have in previous production contracts, but rather we will just have the payloads launched by the contractors under commercial launch services approach. And the contractors will have responsibilities for all the costs of maintaining the pads. In the past, we have actually funded that, and we have refurbished the pads when required with government dollars. That'll become part of the contractor operating procedures.
If I could just talk for a second about the operational aspects of this for the Air Force in terms of Air Force Space Command. Today we have large operational squadrons on both the East and West Coast, a total of 3 on the East Coast and a total of 3 on the West Coast. And what we will do under this new concept is we are procuring a launch service. So we will collapse down from 3 operational squadrons on each coast down to a single operational squadron. So this is significant. Today when we launch either Atlas or Titan, an awful lot of oversight takes place, an awful lot of people on the pad, militarily controlling the whole operation. What we're going to do now is procure the launch service. In other words, they put the satellite on orbit. So this will be a big benefit to the Air Force in terms of collapsing down to a single squadron on both coasts.
How does it work if a contractor fails to deliver something to a proper orbit? How does the contract work for that?
We really have 2 options. Right now, the way that the basic launch service is written is we buy the launch service, and if the payload fails to get on orbit, then we assume that loss. However, we do have the option prior to launch to buy insurance. And in that case, if we buy insurance for a nominal amount of money, a few % of the overall vehicle cost, then they are entitled to either give us a credit or reflight at our option.
And this is a standard commercial practice, which is what we have adopted as part of our acquisition reform on this program. Yes.
Well, first off, I'm a little confused. I think one of you all mentioned that the first launch was going to be of a commercial payload.
Yes, that's
I see.
in 2001. And what we're showing you are the military payloads up
Who's
here.
going to do the first launch in 2001?
I believe it's Boeing.
Okay. And is a little curious, I'm a little surprised actually to see that Boeing seems to have the bulk of the missions here, including some mission categories for which they haven't traditionally been the Air Force launch services provider. Do any of you want to address why Boeing did so well relative to Lockheed Martin here?
Yes, clearly the way we structured the requirement, the competition, we call it a best value competition. And we carefully examined the proposals submitted by each of the contractors, scored them against the criteria. and looked at other things like industrial base considerations, and price was a very important factor in this competition. And as I went through and assessed each one of the missions, we put together a rather sophisticated model, and we were able to run a variety of scenarios and decide what offered the greatest advantage to us, price and other factors considered, to turn it into a best value. But Boeing, yes, clearly got the largest number of launches, and that was because they were very, very competitive in their pricing.
Did the contractors actually have to submit bids for each individual launch?
Yes, they did.
Evaluated?
Yes, yes.
So they won each one on individual
Yes,
merits, basically?
yes.
Okay.
Dr. Gansler emphasized the importance of this in terms of commercial, the nation's economy and strengthening our commercial space launch thing. Is there any way, you've obviously just got the government missions here, is there a rough figure you can give us for the theoretical capability of how many other launches per year other than these you could have if everything was running smoothly and these pads, things were on the pad a few days as opposed to many days or whatever? Is there a ballpark figure?
I would say that we have worked very closely with the Department of Transportation and ComStack. We do have a Department of Transportation representative here, Manny Vega. Manny, I think you might want to come up and address that, but I can tell you overall that when we looked at all the various models, come on up, Manny, that we have, that both Lockheed Martin and Boeing have as well, we concluded that we were about 30% of the marketplace or less. Clearly, the commercial marketplace dominates in this arena, and hence that's why we went forward with part of our acquisition reform of keeping two sources, relying on the competitive market forces, and also using, in essence, almost like a cooperative development agreement where we fund part of it, but in a partnership with industry. Manny, would you want to talk more specifically to that?
Yes, I'll be glad to. One of the interesting aspects about the ELV program was the fact that commercial considerations were taken into consideration early on in the program. What that resulted was that the mission model that we have used for GEO was utilized in kind of addressing the needs of the industry over time. We have developed that mission model. That mission model fits the use of the ELV, and without predicting a specific number of launches, what it means is that these ELVs will be competitive in terms of bidding for those payloads that we have forecasted into the year 2010.
Okay, how about one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
They have wrapped it up already.
Good. All right, thank you very much.